In just 48 seconds, one of Hollywood's biggest stars went from smiling guest to furious opponent, unleashing a verbal takedown so brutal that it left Michael Strahan speechless and the entire Good Morning America studio in absolute chaos. What started as friendly banter exploded into a fiery argument that ended with George Clooney being kicked off the show in the most dramatic exit morning television has ever witnessed. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the behind-the-scenes drama the celebrities don't want you to know about, and the moments that get cut from your favorite talk shows. Don't miss out on tomorrow's bombshell revelation. The atmosphere in the Good Morning America studio last night seemed pleasant enough when George Clooney walked onto the set. The audience clapped and cheered as the actor waved and took his seat across from Michael Strahan. The cameras were rolling, the lights were bright, and everyone expected another smooth celebrity interview to fill the morning broadcast. But what nobody knew was that tension had been building behind the scenes for weeks, and it was about to boil over in spectacular fashion. Strahan opened with his trademark smile, welcoming Clooney to the show. "George, great to have you here, man. Thanks for coming by," he said, extending his hand for a shake. Clooney shook it, but his expression was already guarded. Anyone watching closely could see something was off from the very beginning. His jaw was tight, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and when he sat down, he leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Thanks for having me, Michael," Clooney replied, his voice measured and careful. Strahan jumped right into the questions, starting with Clooney's latest film project. For a few minutes, the conversation flowed normally. Clooney talked about his director's vision, the challenges of filming in difficult locations, and the talented cast he worked with. But Strahan seemed distracted, barely listening to the answers, his eyes frequently darting to his notes or to someone off camera. It was subtle at first, but Clooney noticed. His responses got shorter, more clipped. Then Strahan shifted gears without warning. "So George, I gotta ask you about something that's been making headlines," he said, his tone suddenly more aggressive. "There's been some controversy about your production company and how you treat your crew members. Some former employees have come forward with complaints about the work environment. What's your response to that?" The studio went quiet. Clooney's face hardened immediately. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, staring directly at Strahan. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Strahan didn't back down. He repeated the question, adding more detail this time. "Yeah, there are reports that several crew members from your last 3 productions filed complaints about excessive work hours, inadequate breaks, and what some called a hostile atmosphere on set. These are serious allegations, George. The public deserves to know your side of the story." Clooney's eyes narrowed. "Michael, we talked about this before the show. Your producers and I specifically agreed that this topic was off limits. We had a clear understanding about what would be discussed today, and this wasn't part of it." Strahan shrugged, his smile never wavering. "Well, George, I'm a journalist. When there's a story that matters, I have to ask the tough questions. That's my job. You understand that, right? You can't just control the narrative and decide what the public gets to hear." The condescension in Strahan's voice was unmistakable, and Clooney caught it immediately. His face flushed red, and when he spoke again, his voice had an edge that could cut glass. "A journalist? Is that what you're calling yourself now, Michael? Because last I checked, ambushing guests with questions you promised not to ask isn't journalism. It's called being a damn liar." The audience gasped. Someone off camera said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Strahan's smile faltered for just a second before he tried to recover. "George, come on, man, don't be like that. I'm just doing my job here. If the allegations are false, just say they're false. Simple as that." But Clooney wasn't having it. He pointed a finger at Strahan, his voice rising with every word. "You don't get to sit there and act like you're some crusader for truth when you're just trying to create drama for ratings. Those allegations you're talking about? They were investigated thoroughly by an independent third party, and every single one was found to be without merit. But you don't mention that part, do you? You don't mention that the person who made those claims was fired for stealing equipment and is now trying to retaliate. You just throw out accusations and pretend you're asking the hard questions. Strahan leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from friendly to defensive. Hey, I'm just reading what's been reported in the media, George. If you've got a problem with what's being said about you, maybe you should look at how you run your business instead of attacking me for asking about it. The tension in the studio was suffocating now. Clooney stood up from his chair, his body language aggressive. You know what, Michael? I've known you for years. We've been at events together, we've had conversations, and I actually thought you were a decent guy. But this is low, even for morning television. You made an agreement, you looked me in the eye and promised certain topics wouldn't come up, and then you ambushed me anyway. That's not journalism. That's betrayal. Strahan stood up too, his voice getting louder to match Clooney's energy. Betrayal? Are you serious right now? You Hollywood types are all the same. You want to control everything, script every question, make sure nothing uncomfortable ever gets asked. But guess what? The real world doesn't work like that. When you're a public figure making millions of dollars, you don't get to hide from accountability. Clooney laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a bitter, angry sound that echoed through the studio. Accountability? You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about the stories I've heard about you, Michael. Let's talk about how you treat the production assistants on this show. Let's talk about the complaints that never make it to air because ABC protects you. You want to play this game? Because I guarantee you don't want me to start asking the tough questions. That hit a nerve. Strahan's face went from defensive to furious in an instant. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper that the microphones barely caught. You better watch what you're saying right now, George. You don't know what you're talking about. But Clooney was on a roll, and he wasn't backing down. Oh, I don't? Because I've talked to people who work here. I've heard the stories. But the difference between you and me is that I actually care about the truth, not just ratings. You threw out unverified garbage about me on national television, breaking a promise you made, just to create a moment. That's not holding anyone accountable. That's exploitation. A producer rushed onto the set, trying to calm things down. Gentlemen, please, let's just take a breath here, she said, her voice shaking with nervousness. But neither man was listening. They were locked in a staring contest, both of them breathing hard, both of them ready to explode. Strahan ignored the producer completely. You know what your problem is, George? You think because you're some big Hollywood star, you're above being questioned. You think you can just waltz in here, promote whatever project you're working on, and leave without anyone challenging you. Well, I've got news for you. This isn't your show. This is MY Show. And on MY Show, I ask whatever questions I want. Clooney stepped closer, his voice dripping with contempt. Your show? Your show is a puff piece factory that turns serious news into entertainment garbage. You're not a journalist, Michael. You're a performer who reads a teleprompter and smiles for the camera. And the fact that you think ambushing guests makes you some kind of hard-hitting interviewer is absolutely pathetic. The insult landed like a punch. Strahan's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Get the hell off my stage, he said through gritted teeth. Clooney laughed again, that same bitter sound. Gladly. I wouldn't stay on this joke of a show for another second. But before I go, let me make something crystal clear. You broke your word today. You lied to me and my team. And everyone watching this knows exactly what kind of person that makes you. He started to turn away, but Strahan wasn't done. Yeah, walk away, George. That's what you people do when you can't handle the heat. Run back to your mansion and your yes-men who tell you everything you want to hear. Clooney spun back around, his face red with rage. You want to talk about handling heat? Let's talk about how you're so insecure about your credibility that you have to create fake drama to feel relevant. Let's talk about how you're jealous of anyone who's actually accomplished something meaningful. Let's talk about how this whole stunt today was because you're desperate for attention and you thought taking a cheap shot at me would get you some headlines. The words hit like bombs, and Strahan exploded. Jealous? Of you? Are you out of your damn mind? I've got a career that doesn't depend on playing pretend for a living. I've achieved things in sports that actually matter, not just reading lines someone else wrote for me. Clooney's voice went ice cold. And yet here you are, on a morning talk show, so hungry for validation that you'd throw away your integrity for a viral moment. How's that working out for you, champion? By this point, multiple producers had rushed onto the set. Security guards were standing nearby, ready to intervene if things got physical. The studio audience sat in shocked silence, some people with their phones out recording every second of the confrontation. The cameras were still rolling, capturing everything. Strahan's face was purple with anger now. "Get him out of here," he shouted to security, pointing at Clooney. "Get him off my stage right now. This interview is over." But Clooney was already removing his microphone, ripping it off his collar and dropping it on the chair. "Don't worry, Michael. I was leaving anyway. I don't waste my time with people who don't know the meaning of honor or honesty. You broke your word. You tried to humiliate me on television. And you failed. The only person who looks bad here is you." Strahan stepped forward, getting right in Clooney's face. "You think you're better than me? You think you're some kind of saint? You're just another entitled celebrity who can't handle being challenged." Clooney didn't back away. He stood his ground, his voice calm but lethal. "I don't think I'm better than you, Michael. I know I'm better than you. Because I would never do to someone what you just tried to do to me. I would never break my word and then act like I'm the victim when called out on it. That's the difference between us." The two men stood there, inches apart, both breathing hard. For a moment, it looked like things might actually get physical. Security moved closer, ready to step in. The producer was frantically gesturing to someone in the control room, probably trying to cut to commercial. Then Clooney took a step back. "You're not worth it," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're just not worth it." He looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, at the crew members watching with wide eyes. Everyone here just witnessed what happens when someone values ratings over relationships, drama over decency. Remember this moment. He turned and started walking toward the exit. Strahan called after him, his voice shaking with rage. "That's right, run away. Go cry to your publicist about how mean I was, see if anyone cares." Clooney stopped at the edge of the stage and looked back one final time. "The sad thing is, Michael, I actually used to respect you. I thought you were one of the good ones, but you sold out whatever integrity you had for a cheap moment that's going to make you look like a fool. I hope it was worth it." Strahan's response was immediate and harsh. "I don't need your respect, George. I don't need anything from you. You want to know what I think? I think you came here expecting softball questions and a free promotional platform, and when you actually got challenged for once, you couldn't handle it. That's what I think. That's what everyone watching thinks." But Clooney was already walking away, his back straight, his head held high. He didn't look back again, didn't respond to Strahan's continued shouting. He just kept walking until he reached the studio exit, pushed through the door, and disappeared from view. The studio erupted in chaos. Audience members were talking loudly, some standing up to get a better view. Crew members rushed around trying to figure out what to do next. Strahan stood on the stage, his chest heaving, his face still flushed with anger. A producer approached him, trying to say something, but he waved her away. "We're done here," he said into his microphone, which was still live. That's what happens when people can't handle honest questions. They storm off like children. But the damage was done. The confrontation had been captured from multiple angles, every word recorded, every expression caught on camera. What was supposed to be a standard celebrity interview promoting a new film had turned into one of the most explosive moments in morning television history. The fight had escalated from a broken promise to a full-scale character assassination on both sides. Accusations flew about integrity, professionalism, and personal values. Both men had said things they probably couldn't take back, burning a bridge that had taken years to build. And it had all happened live, in front of millions of viewers and a studio audience that would never forget what they witnessed. Strahan eventually composed himself enough to address the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you just saw, but I will not apologize for asking tough questions. That's my job, and I'll continue to do it regardless of who gets upset about it." His words sounded hollow, though, even to the people in the studio, because everyone who watched the confrontation could see what had really happened. A promise had been broken, trust had been shattered, and what could have been a respectful interview about legitimate concerns had instead turned into a personal attack that made both men look bad. As Strahan tried to transition to the next segment, his voice was still shaking with residual anger. His co-hosts, who had been sitting silently through the entire confrontation, looked uncomfortable and uncertain. One of them attempted to make a joke to lighten the mood, but it fell flat. The energy in the studio was too heavy, too charged with the aftermath of what had just happened. Meanwhile, somewhere in the building, George Clooney was probably surrounded by his team, processing what had just occurred. He had come to promote a film, to have a pleasant conversation, to connect with viewers. Instead, he had been ambushed with allegations he thought were settled, pushed to a breaking point, and ultimately kicked off the show in disgrace. But from Clooney's perspective, he hadn't been the one who was disgraced. He had stood up for himself, called out dishonest behavior, and refused to be bullied on national television. He had maintained his composure even while angry, made his points clearly, and walked away with his dignity intact. Whether the public would see it that way remained to be seen. But in that moment, leaving the studio, he seemed certain he had done the right thing. The confrontation lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish, but it would be talked about for much longer. Every moment had been intense. Every exchange had been loaded with emotion and meaning. From Strahan's controversial question to Clooney's final exit, the entire incident was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when trust is broken and tempers are lost. As Clooney's car pulled away from the ABC studios, the story was already spreading across social media. Clips were being shared, think pieces were being written, and people were taking sides. Some defended Strahan's right to ask tough questions. Others condemned him for breaking an agreement and ambushing a guest. Some criticized Clooney for losing his cool. Others praised him for standing up to what they saw as an unfair attack. But all of that would come later. In the moment, in the studio, as the show went to commercial break and everyone tried to process what had just happened, one thing was clear. Morning television had just witnessed something unprecedented. A confrontation that started with a broken promise had escalated into a full-scale war of words, ending with one of Hollywood's biggest stars being kicked off the show in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. The cameras stopped rolling, but the impact of those 48 seconds of initial tension and the 15 minutes of chaos that followed would last far longer than anyone in that studio could have predicted.